I'm Alex, and today's story will change the way you see success and family. Imagine being the golden child, admired, unstoppable, until one night, everything crumbles. At her own celebration, Lauren Westwood expected praise, but instead, she was blindsided. Her overlooked sister Elise had secretly built a game-changing innovation, stealing the spotlight and shattering Lauren's illusion of superiority. But this isn't just a story of rivalry, it's about facing hard truths, redemption, and redefining success. Stay with me, because sometimes, the greatest victories happen where you least expect them. The golden hues of the late afternoon sun cascaded through the grand bay windows of the Westwood residence, an opulent white mansion in Boston's prestigious Beacon Hill district. The living room, a masterful blend of vintage luxury and modern refinement, carried an air of dignified sophistication. Antique furniture with intricate carvings stood proudly under the soft glow of an elaborate crystal chandelier, while the faint scent of freshly brewed Earl Grey tea lingered in the air. At the center of it all sat Catherine Westwood, a woman of timeless grace in her early 60s, wrapped in an elegant Chanel tweed jacket, exuding an aura of effortless poise. In her hand, she delicately held a porcelain teacup, her pinky finger slightly raised, a refined habit cultivated over decades of high society engagements. She smiled approvingly at her younger daughter, Lauren, who sat beside her, radiating polished charm in a structured ivory dress. "I'm beyond proud of you, Lauren," Catherine said, her voice smooth and deliberate. Becoming the youngest department head in Westwood Technologies at just 27, well, that's nothing short of extraordinary. Lauren, with her flawless complexion and neatly styled chestnut brown hair, beamed under her mother's praise. Her perfectly applied nude lipstick barely moved as she responded with rehearsed modesty. "Thank you, Mom, but it's really the company's investment in young talent that made this possible." Despite her humility, there was an unmistakable flicker of triumph in her emerald green eyes. A few feet away, near the expansive floor-to-ceiling window, Elise Westwood, the eldest daughter at 34, sat in a high-backed armchair, quietly observing the exchange. Dressed in a simple navy sweater over tailored slacks, she looked nothing like the polished image of her sister. Unlike Lauren, who thrived in the world of high-status networking and ambitious career moves, Elise preferred the quiet discipline of numbers, working as a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized accounting firm. She had long grown accustomed to being overlooked in these conversations. "Elise, have you ever considered a career change?" Lauren asked suddenly, her voice light but edged with something calculated. Elise turned from the window, arching a brow. "A career change?" "Yes," Lauren continued smoothly, "Westwood Tech is always looking for talent, and I could easily put in a word with HR for you." Catherine perked up at the suggestion. "That's a wonderful idea. Elise dear, you have potential, but staying at that tiny accounting firm is such a waste. You should aim higher, challenge yourself." Elise rested her teacup on the polished glass coffee table, her movements unhurried. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm quite happy where I am," she said with a polite smile. Her voice was soft yet carried an undercurrent of quiet confidence. Across from them their father, Richard Westwood, a distinguished professor of quantum physics at Boston University, listened with measured silence, the edge of his newspaper curling slightly between his fingers. Unlike Catherine, who took pride in outward success, Richard had always valued intellect and quiet determination. His mild expression, however, held something contemplative, as if he were mentally calculating the trajectory of this conversation before deciding whether to intervene. Lauren sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "Elise, you're already 34, and you're still at that firm? I mean, at what point do you start thinking about advancing your career?" There it was, the thinly veiled criticism disguised as concern. Elise's smile did not falter, but her fingers curled slightly around the armrest of her chair. "Success looks different for everyone," she said simply. Before Lauren could counter, she gracefully rose to her feet. "Speaking of work, I have some reports to review before tomorrow's meeting." "Excuse me." She left the room with steady, purposeful steps, her posture betraying none of the lingering frustration tightening in her chest. Behind her, Catherine turned back to Lauren, unfazed. "Now, about your promotion party. Have you chosen a venue?" Lauren's eyes sparkled. "Yes. The Langham Hotel, of course. I want the entire family there." Catherine clapped her hands together in delight. "Magnificent. I can't wait." As the conversation shifted back to celebrating Lauren, Richard folded his newspaper neatly and took a measured sip of his tea. From the hallway, Elise could still hear their voices, full of pride and excitement for the younger sister who had always been their golden child. She exhaled slowly, a knowing glint flashing in her gaze as she pulled out her phone. A new email notification popped up, one that confirmed an upcoming meeting in Silicon Valley. If only they knew. The grand ballroom at the Langham Hotel shimmered under the soft golden glow of countless chandeliers. The warm flicker of candlelight reflected off crystal glassware, casting elegant patterns on the marble floor. A towering champagne fountain stood at the center of the room, surrounded by an arch of delicate pink and white roses. Everywhere, the hum of polite conversation mixed with the clinking of glasses, as Boston's elite gathered to celebrate Lauren Westwood's latest triumph, her promotion to department head at Westwood Technologies. She stood near the entrance, a vision of perfection in a fitted black Chanel dress, her diamond earrings catching the light with every graceful movement. Beside her, their mother, Catherine Westwood, dressed in a refined Dior suit, beamed with pride, introducing Lauren to every guest as if she were royalty. "Look at my daughter," Catherine said, placing a delicate hand on Lauren's arm. "She has always been so ambitious. I knew she was destined for greatness." Laughter, admiration, nods of approval. Lauren soaked it all in, her smile never wavering. This was her moment. Across the room, near the large floor-to-ceiling windows, Elise Westwood sat alone at a table, watching the scene unfold. Unlike the other guests in their designer gowns and tailored suits, she wore a simple slate blue dress, modest, understated. She had never been one for grand entrances or self-congratulatory speeches, and tonight was no exception. She took a sip of her wine, her fingers lightly tapping the stem of the glass. This party, this entire evening, was just another reminder of the way things had always been. Lauren, the golden child, celebrated. Elise, the forgotten one, sidelined. And yet, she remained. "Thank you all for coming tonight," a voice rang out, smooth, confident. Lauren had taken the stage, standing beneath a massive banner that read "Congratulations, Lauren Westwood" in shimmering gold lettering. The entire room turned toward her, their expressions expectant. Elise settled back in her chair. She had heard enough of these speeches before. "It's an incredible honor to be named the youngest department head at Westwood Technologies," Lauren continued, her voice carrying effortlessly through the ballroom. "I wouldn't be here today without the incredible mentorship, the relentless drive, and of course, the support of my family." She turned, her gaze sweeping across the room, lingering briefly on her mother before landing on Elise. A slow, deliberate smile curved her lips. "And speaking of family," Lauren went on, a playful lilt in her tone, "there's someone here tonight who has been a constant presence in my life." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged curious glances. Elise felt the weight of their stares shift toward her. "My sister Elise," Lauren announced, her voice dripping with manufactured warmth. "She's always been an inspiration to me, a lesson in what not to do." A beat of silence. Then, soft chuckles. A few awkward coughs. The kind of laughter that wasn't outright cruel, but carried a sharpness meant to wound. Elise's fingers tightened around the base of her glass. "You see," Lauren continued, smiling sweetly, "while I was climbing the corporate ladder, Elise decided to take a different path. A small accounting firm, wasn't it, Elise?" All eyes were on her now. "Day in, day out, the same work, the same routine," Lauren mused. "No risks. No ambition. Just stability." More laughter. Louder this time. Even Catherine pressed a gloved hand to her lips, hiding a smirk. Elise remained motionless, her expression unreadable. Across the ballroom their father, Richard Westwood, sat stiffly in his chair, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. Unlike the rest of the guests, he did not laugh. "And maybe," Lauren added, "someone should teach my sister a little about success." The laughter swelled, echoing off the high ceilings. And then, Elise smiled. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A knowing, measured expression. She picked up her phone, her fingers moving with practiced ease. A single press of the screen. The action was quiet, unremarkable, yet decisive. At that very moment, the heavy ballroom doors swung open. A man strode in, his presence commanding immediate attention. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, his steps were purposeful, assured. Jonathan Hayes. The CEO of Westwood Technologies. The room fell silent in an instant. Lauren's confident smile faltered. "Mr. Hayes," she said hastily, adjusting her posture. I didn't know you were coming." Jonathan offered a polite nod, but his attention was elsewhere. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room, searching, until they landed on Elise. "Miss Westwood," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people listen. "Would you join me on stage?" A hushed murmur rippled through the guests. Elise took her time. She placed her glass down gently, then stood. Gone was the quiet observer in the corner. In her place stood someone entirely different, someone who moved with an elegance that could not be ignored. Lauren's throat tightened. "Tonight," Jonathan continued, turning to address the crowd, "we celebrate a milestone. But not just for Lauren Westwood." Lauren's entire body stiffened. "The world is about to be introduced to a groundbreaking technology," Jonathan said, his gaze sweeping the room. "And at the center of it is Elise Westwood." Silence. Then, gasps. Elise stepped forward, unhurried, measured. She met Lauren's stunned gaze with quiet, unwavering confidence. "Shall we begin?" she asked, her voice smooth, composed. For the first time that evening, Lauren had no words. Blue heart if this story touched your heart, like this video to show your support. Speech balloon comment 1, if you believe family always finds a way back together. Loudspeaker share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Bell don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories that touch the soul. A heavy silence settled over the ballroom, the weight of the moment pressing against every guest in attendance. The air, once filled with laughter and whispered gossip, now crackled with an unspoken tension. Elise Westwood stood poised at the edge of the stage, her simple slate blue dress now seeming less ordinary and more like a deliberate statement, understated yet commanding. All eyes were on Jonathan Hayes, the CEO of Westwood Technologies, who had just delivered the night's most shocking revelation. Elise Westwood, the sister who had just been mocked in front of hundreds, was at the center of a revolutionary technological breakthrough. At the podium, Lauren Westwood remained frozen, her manicured fingers gripping the microphone. Just moments ago, she had been the star of the evening, basking in admiration, reveling in the praise showered upon her. But now, the very foundation of her carefully curated world was shaking beneath her. Jonathan took another step forward, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room. For the past 5 years, Elise Westwood has been working on something that will redefine the future of cybersecurity. A project so advanced, it has already secured an unprecedented level of investment, over $1 billion from global tech giants. Gasps rippled through the room. A few guests leaned in, murmuring among themselves, processing what they had just heard. Jonathan continued, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. Elise's AI-driven quantum security system is the first of its kind, capable of defending against threats that modern encryption cannot even begin to handle. This isn't just innovation. This is a revolution. At this, Elise finally moved. She stepped onto the stage, her heels clicking against the polished wood floor, her posture exuding a quiet authority that had long been underestimated. She met Lauren's gaze, not with gloating or malice, but with something far more unsettling. A calm, unshakable confidence. Lauren, still gripping the microphone, felt her stomach twist. She had spent years believing that Elise was stagnant, unambitious, content with mediocrity. And yet, here she was, standing at the center of a technological breakthrough that had already attracted the attention of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. The room held its breath as Jonathan turned to Elise. "Would you like to say a few words?" Elise took the microphone with a measured grace, her fingers steady. The silence in the room was so absolute that the soft hum of the city outside was suddenly audible. 5 years ago, she began, her voice smooth, deliberate, "I made a choice." Lauren swallowed, her throat dry. "I chose to build something that mattered," Elise continued. "Not for recognition. Not for status. But because I saw a problem in the world that needed a solution. And I knew I could solve it." Her gaze swept across the audience, her words sinking in. "There were nights I worked until sunrise. Holidays spent in research labs instead of celebrations. I turned down high-profile job offers, refused shortcuts, and built this technology from the ground up." She paused, then smiled, just slightly. All while working at that tiny accounting firm that seemed so unimpressive. A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the crowd. Elise glanced toward her father, Richard Westwood, who sat near the front, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "My father knew," she said softly. "He supported me without expectations, without needing me to prove my worth in a way that fit into a neat little box." Catherine Westwood stiffened, her fingers tightening around the stem of her champagne flute. It was the first time in years that she had truly looked at Elise, not as an afterthought, not as an accessory to Lauren's success, but as something else entirely. Elise turned to face Jonathan. "And now, it's time to take the next step." Jonathan nodded. "That's right. Westwood Technologies is honored to be the first enterprise partner implementing Elise's system. As of tonight, we are finalizing a contract that will reshape the landscape of digital security." Lauren inhaled sharply. Her own company was adopting Elise's technology. A hush fell over the room, a collective realization washing over every guest. The power dynamic had shifted so drastically in mere moments that it felt disorienting. Elise returned the microphone to Jonathan and took a step back, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. The applause started hesitantly. A few claps, then more, then a swell of sound that echoed through the grand ballroom. Some guests rose to their feet. Industry executives, once indifferent to the woman in the simple blue dress, now regarded her with reverence. But not everyone was celebrating. Lauren stood rigid, her perfect posture betraying the turmoil within. Everything she had built her identity around, her status, her superiority, the unwavering approval of their mother, was crumbling. Elise turned toward her sister, meeting her gaze once more. There was no gloating in her eyes. No satisfaction in Lauren's downfall. Only a quiet certainty. "You once told me someone should teach me about success," Elise said softly. "I hope tonight, you learned something too." The words weren't cruel. They weren't spoken to humiliate. And yet, they cut deeper than any public ridicule ever could. For the first time in her life, Lauren had no response. The ballroom, once filled with elegant laughter and effortless charm, now felt like a vacuum, silent, tense, thick with unspoken words. The applause for Elise Westwood had died down, yet its impact still echoed in every stunned expression, every whispered conversation. The woman they had just pitied, the one they had mocked, had risen beyond any of them in ways they never imagined. At the center of it all, Lauren Westwood stood frozen. The air conditioning of the grand ballroom suddenly felt too cold, the weight of her Chanel dress too heavy on her shoulders. Her mind was racing, trying to grasp the reality that had just shattered her world. Elise had everything now: respect, power, recognition. And worse, the approval that had always belonged to Lauren alone. She barely registered the cautious tap on her arm. "Lauren," Catherine Westwood's voice was low but urgent, her perfectly curated composure slipping at the edges. "Say something." Lauren swallowed, tightening her grip around the microphone. Her throat was dry. Her usual charm, her well-practiced ease in social settings, was failing her. She had never been in this position before, at the receiving end of scrutiny, of judgment, of pity. Her mother stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Lauren could hear. "We need to recover from this." Recover. As if this were some unfortunate accident, a minor social misstep, a stain on a designer gown that could be washed away with the right spin. Lauren finally looked toward her father, Richard Westwood, sitting near the front. Unlike Catherine, he wasn't urging her to act, to salvage her image. He wasn't looking at her at all. His gaze was locked on Elise, his expression filled with something rare: pride. The sight made Lauren's stomach twist painfully. For years, she had been the center of their mother's universe. The chosen one. The daughter who did everything right. But now, for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar in her mother's touch, in her urgent whispers. Doubt. Elise, meanwhile, had stepped away from the stage, returning to a corner of the room where several high-ranking executives had already gathered, eager to speak with her. A year ago, these same men had likely dismissed her as irrelevant, just another unknown name. Now, they needed her. Her father approached, standing beside her in quiet solidarity. "I always knew you were capable of something great," Richard said, his voice steady, warm. Elise turned, meeting his gaze. Unlike the others in the room, there was no surprise in his eyes, only understanding, as if he had known all along. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time in years, she meant it. From across the ballroom, Catherine Westwood watched them, her breath catching in her throat. She had always prided herself on knowing her daughters. on shaping them into the women they were supposed to become. But now, staring at Elise, the daughter she had underestimated, the daughter she had pushed to the background, she realized she had never truly seen her at all. Catherine turned to Lauren, who still stood rigid on the stage. The moment was slipping through their fingers, and Lauren was doing nothing. "Smile," Catherine hissed. Lauren forced a tight, unnatural curve to her lips. It did nothing to mask the devastation in her eyes. As the event slowly unraveled, the Westwood name, once synonymous with control, prestige and power, was now the subject of hushed conversations, uncertain glances. Lauren, unable to withstand it any longer, stepped off the stage and made her way toward the exit, barely registering the murmurs of sympathy that followed her. For the first time in her life, she was the one people pitied. Catherine was quick to follow, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor as she caught up with Lauren in the hallway just outside the ballroom. "Lauren," she snapped, grabbing her daughter's wrist. "You need to." "I need to what?" Lauren's voice was sharp, unsteady. She turned, eyes blazing. "Fix this? Pretend like it didn't happen? That Elise didn't just humiliate me in front of everyone?" Catherine's expression darkened. "She didn't humiliate you, you humiliated yourself." The words hit harder than any public embarrassment ever could. Lauren took a shaky breath, stepping back as realization settled in. She had done this to herself. She had stood on that stage and laughed at Elise, confident that her sister would always remain beneath her. She had treated Elise like an afterthought. But Elise had never been behind her. She had simply been walking her own path, one that had now left Lauren in the dust. Catherine sighed, rubbing her temple. "Lauren, we need to." But Lauren wasn't listening anymore. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving her mother standing alone in the dimly lit hallway. For the first time in her life, Lauren Westwood had nowhere to go. The night had ended, but the impact of the evening lingered like a storm refusing to clear. The once lively ballroom was now nearly empty, save for a few remaining guests murmuring in hushed tones. Outside, the cool Boston air carried whispers of the night scandal, the Westwood family's name passing through lips with a mixture of shock and intrigue. Lauren Westwood sat rigidly in the back seat of her mother's sleek black town car, staring blankly out the tinted window as the city lights blurred past. The events of the evening replayed in her mind like a cruel, inescapable loop: her triumphant moment, Elise's quiet defiance, Jonathan Hayes' announcement, and finally, the way the room had shifted. For years, when people had spoken of the Westwood daughters, it was her name that had carried weight. Lauren, the ambitious one, the rising star, the daughter who was meant to take the family legacy to greater heights. But tonight, she had become something else entirely. Forgettable. Replaceable. A hand lightly touched her wrist. "Lauren," Catherine's voice was softer than usual, yet it lacked the warmth of comfort. "This is not the end." Lauren turned to her mother, her expression unreadable. "Isn't it?" she asked, her voice quiet, detached. Catherine pursed her lips. "You had a moment of misjudgment. We can rebuild." Lauren let out a hollow laugh. "A moment?" "I stood there and mocked Elise in front of everyone. I treated her like she was nothing, and the entire time, she was out there changing the world." Catherine stiffened. "Elise was lucky." "She was smart," Lauren corrected. "And I was arrogant." The admission tasted bitter on her tongue. But now, sitting in the car with the weight of reality pressing down on her, there was no denying it. She had believed she was untouchable, that success belonged to her simply because it always had. And now, for the first time in her life, she understood what it felt like to be left behind. "Jonathan Hayes won't see me the same way again," she murmured, more to herself than to her mother. Catherine inhaled sharply, her grip tightening on her purse. "We will fix this," she repeated, her voice laced with frustration. "You just need to." But Lauren wasn't listening anymore. Her mind was elsewhere, on the whispers that would follow her at work, on the realization that her career at Westwood Technologies, the company her own sister had just reshaped, might never recover from this. She thought of Elise. For so long, she had pitied her sister, seen her as a shadow in the background of her own success. She had never imagined a reality where Elise would surpass her. And yet, that was exactly what had happened. She exhaled slowly, leaning back against the seat. "Mom," she said after a long silence. "Maybe I need to figure this out on my own." Catherine's eyes flickered with something close to alarm. Lauren, don't be ridiculous. You don't. But Lauren shook her head.
No. This time, I Donnerstag.
For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking for her mother's approval. The car slowed as they reached the Westwood estate. The sprawling mansion stood tall and elegant, just as it always had. But as Lauren stepped out and looked at it, it felt different. For the first time, it wasn't a place of comfort. It was a reminder of everything she had been handed, everything she had taken for granted. The front door opened, and Richard Westwood stepped outside, his gaze calm as he watched his wife and daughter return. But he didn't ask how the night had gone. He didn't need to. The look in Lauren's eyes told him everything. Without a word, she walked past him and disappeared inside. In her room, she kicked off her heels and sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. She had spent her entire life chasing validation, success, admiration. But for the first time, none of it mattered. Because none of it had been real. And now, she had to figure out who she was without it. 1 year had passed since that fateful night at the Langham Hotel. Boston's skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elise Westwood's office in Silicon Valley. Sunlight streamed into the sleek modern space, casting a warm glow over the glass conference table where a copy of Forbes rested, its cover featuring Elise among the 50 most innovative entrepreneurs of the year. Elise took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes scanning through the meeting notes on her tablet. The past year had been a whirlwind: investments, expansion, breakthroughs. The AI-driven quantum security system she had developed was now being integrated into major corporations worldwide. But beyond the business milestones, there was something even more significant. Her family was healing. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. The door swung open, and Lauren Westwood stepped inside. She looked different. Gone was the sharp, corporate stiffness. In its place was something more grounded. Her once perfectly styled waves were now loosely tied back. Her tailored blazers had been swapped for a more relaxed yet professional look. But more than anything, it was her eyes that had changed. They no longer carried the hollow desperation of someone clinging to an identity built on validation. Elise gestured toward the chair across from her. "Right on time." Lauren offered a small smile as she sat. "Old habits die hard." Elise leaned back, studying her sister. "How's the transition going?" Lauren exhaled, her fingers brushing against the project folder she had brought. "Challenging. But in a good way." After leaving Westwood Technologies, Lauren had spent months in reflection, uncertain of her next step. For the first time in her life, there was no clear path, no safety net of privilege to catch her. But instead of falling, she had found purpose, working in Elise's company, leading a division focused on social impact initiatives. It wasn't about prestige anymore. It was about building something real. Lauren slid the folder across the table. "We just finalized the education tech partnership for underfunded schools. The platform launches next quarter." Elise flipped through the pages, nodding in approval. "This is good work, Lauren." A beat of silence passed before Lauren spoke again. "You know, a year ago, I wouldn't have imagined sitting here like this." Elise looked up, meeting her sister's gaze. "A year ago, neither would I." They shared a quiet moment, the weight of everything unspoken settling between them. "You were right that night," Lauren admitted. "Success isn't just about ambition. It's about choosing the right path, even when no one understands it." Elise let out a soft chuckle. "Took you long enough to figure that out?" Lauren smirked. "Well, I've had a pretty good teacher." A notification chimed on Elise's phone, a family video call request from Catherine Westwood. Elise raised a brow. "Mom's early." Lauren glanced at the screen, an amused glint in her eye. "She's been different lately. Less country club, more community outreach. You really shook things up." Elise sighed, shaking her head. "I wasn't trying to. That's why it worked." Elise tapped the screen, and soon Catherine and Richard Westwood appeared. Their mother, once obsessed with outward appearances, now carried a warmth that had once been missing. "Good you're both there," Catherine said, adjusting the camera. "I have wonderful news." Lauren crossed her arms. "Let me guess, your mentorship program is expanding again?" Catherine beamed. "Boston City Council wants to formally recognize it." We're helping more young women find careers on their own terms. Elise and Lauren exchanged glances before Elise smirked. Never thought I'd see the day when you rejected the idea of traditional success. Catherine laughed lightly. Well, we all grow, don't we? Richard, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. Speaking of growth, our monthly family dinners have turned into something I look forward to. Lauren grinned. That's because we don't talk about stock portfolios anymore. Their father chuckled. Maybe. Elise leaned back in her chair, her heart lighter than it had been in years. There had been betrayals. There had been losses. But in the end, what remained was something stronger, a family no longer defined by competition, but by connection. And for the first time, that felt like true success. True success isn't about status or validation, it's about perseverance, integrity, and self-discovery. Elise's journey proves that quiet dedication can outshine superficial achievements, while Lauren's downfall is a reminder that arrogance leads to failure, but growth is always possible. At its heart, this story is about family, redemption, and redefining success. The greatest victories come not from proving others wrong, but from proving yourself right.